Hello, my name is Jaap Hage, and this lecture is about free will and responsibility. The lecture consists of two parts. In the first part, this part, I will discuss the existence of free will, and in particular two arguments why free will does not exist. One argument runs that everybody's will is determined, because everything is determined. And if somebody's will is determined, then the will is not free. The second argument is that there is not even a person, an I, who has a will. So if there is no I, there cannot be a will of a person, and certainly not a free will. But why is this important? Well, this is important because, now I go to the next slide. Free will plays an important part in law with regard to the issue of responsibility. Take, for instance, criminal law. An agent can only be punished if he is responsible for what he did. For instance, if you commit a murder, you need to be responsible for having done that. And an agent can only be responsible if he is accountable. So, if you commit a murder and you are to be punished, you need to be accountable for what you did. And then, third, an agent can only be accountable if he had a free will. So if you could not help, if you had you were mentally forced to do something, commit a murder in this case, you couldn't help it. You didn't have a free will, and then you are not accountable, and then you cannot be responsible for the murder you committed, and you cannot be punished. So this is a very important line of thinking about free will and responsibility in criminal law. But it's not only in criminal law that free will and responsibility are important, also in, for instance, contract law. So a reason why a person is bound by a contract is that she undertook the obligations voluntarily. So if you sell your car for only €1, it sounds a bit stupid if it's a good car, you can still argue, yes, but you did so voluntarily and therefore you are bound by this contract. So you will receive €1 and you have to give your car away to somebody else. You wanted it and your will was free. But this argument only makes sense if you really had a free will. If you don't have a free will, you cannot say that you did sold the car voluntarily, and then maybe you are not bound by the contract. Or in medical law, euthanasia. Of course, there are large debates about whether euthanasia is allowed and under what circumstances. But if euthanasia can be justified at all, it, at least allegedly, can only be justified if the euthanized person wanted it. But that presupposes that this person had a free will. If, for instance, you're mentally ill and you cannot form your will freely anymore, then perhaps your permission for euthanasia is not valid anymore and euthanasia is not justified. At least that's how some judges argue. So free will matters in different areas of law. It's quite important. But is there a free will? Well, there is a long history of arguments that there is no free will. And those arguments are typically connected to the topic of determinism. Determinism is a topic which has not necessarily to do with free will, but it has influence on it. Determinism is the idea that all events are determined, which means that given you have the situation of the universe as it presently is, and given a number of laws of nature, then the universe can only develop in one particular way. So, in that sense, the future is determined by the present and by the laws of nature. There can only be one sequence of events after the present state. Everything is determined. And that also means for the state of your brain. And if your will depends on the physical state of your brain, and that physical state is determined by the past and the laws of nature, the will is also determined, just like everything else in the universe. And if the will is determined, so runs the argument, the will is not free. So, if you committed this murder, about which I spoke with the previous slide, and determinism is true, you could not help committing the murder because you did it voluntarily, but your will was determined. So you had the feeling that you were free to commit the murder or not, but you were not free, your will was determined, and you could not have done anything else than you actually did. This is one argument. I will discuss it in a little bit more detail later. The other argument is an argument about what you might call the disappearing agent. If you were talking about the free will, there must somebody who has this will. The will is always the will of a person, or an agent, whatever you want to call it. This person has this will and uses it to determine what she will do. So, back to the contract in which the car is sold for €1 again. An agent has considered the possibility of receiving a full euro for the car, decided on the balance of reasons that that is exactly what she wants, and then enters into the contract and sells the car for €1. So, but there must be an agent, a person or an I, whatever you want to call it, who takes this decision. But exactly what is this agent? A person, it seems. But the person must have a will, and where is the person who has the will? Is it the body as a whole? Does your arms or your legs have a will? Most likely not. Most people try to find it in the brains. But there has been research on brain states, and never was an agent found, an agent with a will. So the argument runs that it's unlikely that there is an I, and if there is no person or an I, there is no person with a free will either, and there is no free will. That is the second argument. Before we continue, we must make an important distinction. That's the distinction between determinism and fatalism. I have already explained that determinism is the view that given the present state of the universe, you can, for instance, look here, this is the present state of the universe, and if you have it, it can only develop in one particular way. So when you look at the picture, there is only one line, and all the other events are the only possibility of what can happen. In the past, there were several possibilities, but those different possibilities have led to this particular state of affairs. In combination with some other states of affairs, it leads to one future development of the world. This is determinism. The picture below represents fatalism. Fatalism works different. It's the idea that whatever you do, and you have several possibilities, the outcome is always the same. So, for instance, whether you turn to the left or whether you turn to the right, in the end, you will end up at the same place, because all choices you make lead to the same outcome. Some people have this feeling with the political party on which they vote. It doesn't matter. Of course, I'm free to vote for a left-wing party or for a right-wing party, but what they will do in the end is always the same, so it doesn't matter. This is not determinism, because it assumes that you can really make a choice. But the point of fatalism is that your choice has no influence on the future, because all choices lead to the same result. Does this mean that your choice does not matter, not matter at all? Well, of course your choice influences the future, but all choices influence the future in the same way. All the parties on which you vote will follow the same policies. So in that sense, it doesn't matter. But you influence the future by means of your choice. But the influence is not as big as you might have liked. That is fatalism. Fatalism and determinism must be distinguished very well. Because a determinist, if you are a determinist, you might have the idea, whatever I choose, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but you are not free to choose what you want because your will is determined. So your will has an influence on the future, but your will is not free. While when you're a fatalist, your will may be free, but whatever you choose, the outcomes will be the same, nevertheless. So if you are a fatalist, you may have the feeling, it doesn't matter what I do. If you are a determinist, you can still believe, rightly so, that what you decide really matters. But you may have the wrong impression that you are really free to take different decisions. That's not possible. There's only one decision you can take, although you may feel otherwise. But the decision that you take makes a difference. So, if fatalism were true, it would not matter what you do, because every action leads to the same result. Whether you finish this lecture or not, you will or you won't be able to answer the multiple choice questions after the lecture. Fatalism is compatible with having a free will. You are free to do what you want, but whatever you do, the consequence will always be the same. Determinism, on the other hand, makes that your actions do matter. One action leads to another future than a different action. But the point of determinism is not that all different actions lead to the same result. The point is that it's not up to you as an agent, but only to the facts of the past and the laws of nature what you will do. You may have the feeling that you're free to do anything you like, but that's not true. You can do only one thing, and of course, if you do that thing, you have the consequences of that one thing. So don't confuse the two. The next question is determinism true? And for many centuries, people may have had a feeling that determinism is true, especially since the rise of physical sciences in the 16th and 17th century and later. It's possible to make very precise predictions of what will happen if you take a particular course of action. You can predict when planets will collide, if they will collide, or when some vehicle will land on the moon, whatever. It's possible to make very precise predictions of what will happen. And that precision may give you the impression that everything is determined. The laws of nature completely fix what will happen in the future, and exactly that makes it possible to influence the events in the future, because everything is fixed. Indeterminacy is the other thing. It means that it's not determined whether a state of affairs is the case or will be the case. For instance, today, the outcome of a football match of next week is indeterminate. It's not fixed yet. Or, a more legal example, if there is no relevant legislation or case law, it is indeterminate whether test tube babies enjoy full human rights. You may protest against this example, but then if you don't like the example, take another example. The point is, if some legal rules are lacking, the outcome of a particular case is legally indeterminate. It's not that we don't know it, there is no outcome yet. And a judge, for instance, or a court must take a decision to fix the outcome, which was not fixed before. That's something different than uncertainty. Uncertainty means that there is a fact of the matter, that there is no indeterminacy, but we don't know what the fact of the matter is. For instance, since nobody could watch the news, it is uncertain who is the new world chess champion. Of course there is one, because it was decided yesterday, but there was no news about it, or nobody watched the news, so nobody knows. It's uncertain who's the new champion, but there is a new champion. That's all you know. Or it is uncertain what was the weather in London on the 3rd February in the year 2012 of the Common Area. So that is something which there was weather then, so it is determined, but we don't know what it is. So don't confuse indeterminacy with uncertainty. The point is the future determined or is it indeterminate? Of course, we don't know the future most of the times, but that's not the issue. The issue is the future already fixed by the present state of affairs and the laws of nature, or is it not fixed? And there is a branch of physics called quantum theory, which deals with very small particles or waves or whatever you want to call it. And according to quantum theory, some facts remain indeterminate, and that is not only uncertain, but really undetermined, as long as they have not been observed. There's a nice example of it. It's called Schrödinger's cat, after a story told by a famous physician. But the point is that the facts are not completely fixed yet, until they are observed. This phenomenon is called quantum superposition. Therefore, if this quantum theory is true, determinism is false, because depending on the observation in the future, the present state of affairs will be determined only, and not before. So it is not determined yet, which means that determinism is false. And if determinism is false, the argument from determinism against the existence of a free will is not a good argument. So I think, given the present state of physics, the argument from determinism is not a good argument to argue why there is no free will. There might very well be a free will. This is not a good argument. But then, the other arguments, that is, I think, much stronger. And it has to do with agency and consciousness. If determinism is false, does that mean that people have a free will? Well, it depends on what you mean by a free will. A classical answer is that the person's will is free if she consciously and freely decides what to do, and depends also on what she decided to do. At least she does what she decided to do. Take again the example of selling your car for €1. A person considers this, thinks about the possible actions. I can sell the car, or I won't sell the car for €1. Then you make a choice between the alternatives. For instance, you decide, yes, I will sell the car for €1. And then this choice guides your muscles to perform the chosen action. So you guide your muscles of your mouth, you say, yes, I'll sell the car for €1. That is a classical picture of how it works. But where in the brain is the person who guides your muscles? Well, there has been a lot of research to find this person or the I or whatever you want to call it in the brain, and nobody has ever found it. And there has been a lot of research. The I cannot be found. And the question is there such a thing? Well, people say it has to do with your consciousness. You are conscious and you take a conscious decision about what you will do. Well, consciousness is a mental state, but it's not physical. How can something that is not physical influence the muscles of your mouth? We have no idea. A philosopher in the 17th century, René Descartes, thought that this happened somewhere in your brain, had a particular theory about it, but actually that theory is incorrect. We have no idea how somebody's consciousness might influence this person's muscles. A conscious self has never been detected in the brain, and it is unclear how consciousness could influence physical events in the brain. So, perhaps the idea that there is an I is incorrect. Well, actually, this view has already been defended for many centuries in Buddhist philosophy, Indian Buddhist philosophy, which is not well known in Western Europe. But the last few decades, cognitive science has gone in the same direction. And there are actually two theories which are closely related, which more or less copy the ideas which already existed for centuries in Buddhist philosophy. One theory is the theory that mind is modular, and the other theory is so-called pandemonium theory of minds, that there are many different agents in one single person's mind, and there is not one single person who is the boss. Those agents compete for your muscles, in a sense. Let's first have a look at the modularity of mind. That's the upper right picture, which is not very precise. Actually, it's an old picture, but it's so nice and clear. It gives a nice impression of what's going on. The idea is that a person's mind consists of a number of things which perform tasks. So there is part of your brain, for instance, which does watching, seeing things, and there's a part for hearing things, there's a part for smelling things, and all those parts are related to perception. But there is also a part of your brain that keeps track of the level of sugar in your blood. There is a part of your brain which reasons, and there are all different kinds of tasks, and the different tasks are performed by different parts of your brain or your mind. Of course, they interact with each other, but there is no single control center. So there is no I in the brain which controls the modules of the mind. They all operate more or less autonomously, and sometimes, for instance, you're good. If you're in a good mood, then you say kind things to other persons. Sometimes you're in a bad mood, you say not so kind things to another person. Several things can happen, but there is no central person who controls everything. The modules all function more or less autonomously. That goes very well together with another theory. It's called the pandemonium theory of mind, saying that there are more or less several agents, in the picture right below, in your mind, which compete for your muscles. So if you decide to walk, there's one part of your brain which guides your muscles and makes you walk. And then suddenly you change your mind. You don't know why. You say, no, maybe I better go the other direction. Then you stop walking or you walk in a different direction. And then suddenly you find yourself back. Something like that has happened to me, for instance, when I went to the fridge to take something sweet. I love sweets. And I walked to the one. Then, just before the fridge, I stopped. No, this is not what I should do. I walk back to the room. And then 2 minutes later, I find myself back before the fridge again, because then some other module or some other agent, whatever you want to call it, has taken over control. And there is no single I who controls all those modules. Something happens, but what happens is the outcome of the modules or the agents, whatever you want to call them, and not of the single central agent. And if there is no such a single central agent, there is no central will. And if you need free will, it would be very attractive if there were a single agent whose will determines what you will do. If that agent does not exist, then there is no free will. And if there is no free will, perhaps it has huge consequences for your responsibility. But whether that is really the case is a topic for the second half of the lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.